Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with TBA Rabbinic Intern, Rachel Cohn.
So if you have the source sheet with you, we're going to be speaking about an episode that happens in this parsha in which Hagar ends up getting sent away. And I ended up choosing to focus on this inspired by a Beth Am event that I went to. I guess it was within the past week, although it feels like ages ago already, with Resetting the Table, to have a conversation about politics and Israel, but also kind of America. And we were in these small groups where we got to hear more up close and personal, different people's viewpoints about various things going on. And multiple people came away, I think myself included, with this feeling of it's so fascinating as humans that we can both be looking at the same situation and see things entirely differently. So I picked a section of the text where I think there's many characters acting with different motivations. And if we look at their different perspectives, even if a fundamental disagreement or conflict can't be resolved, we can maybe at least try and get behind the scenes, help ourselves understand what they were thinking in the way that, you know, when we have a conversation with human beings where we may not understand their perspective on something, we can at least hear more about their background story and what might be leading them to have those views. There can be a degree of empathy or understanding. So the scene that we will be looking at occurs in Bereshit chapter 21. And to set the scene, this is a party that was held for Yitzchak after he was weaned, which was weaning, and that being kind of a big milestone is mentioned at a couple other points in Tanakh. Though I think even today, it's certainly a milestone in a child's life. So I'll just read the general story we'll be referring to out loud to you in English, and you have the Hebrew there as well if you'd like to reference it. The child, Yitzchak, grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Yitzchak was weaned. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham, and then there's this word, mitzachek, that causes a lot of disagreement. It could be translated perhaps as playing, perhaps as making sport. So we'll kind of leave it up for discussion for now. She said to Abraham, "Cast out that maidservant and her son, for the son of that maidservant shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed over the boy or your maidservant. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Yitzchak that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the maidservant, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed." So then the next day, early the next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. So reading and hearing this story, are there any characters whose actions you think make sense to you or really don't make sense to you, just at face value? Gary, yeah?
Obviously, Sarah was not happy. That makes sense to me because that's competition for her child. And I don't know if she wanted that, what the impact was going to be, but clearly it acted pretty good. I mean, because if he sent away, he was saved and he became a nation.
And does it make sense to you why like specifically right now would have been the moment for Sarah to act on those feelings?
Yeah, because it's when this was the weaning it was the initiation of her son to the community. And so he was now entering the community. And now he saw the older son playing, doing his thing so that it was time to make sure there was no competition.
Okay.
My humble opinion.
Great. Other thoughts? Brant, yeah?
I think a lot of this hinges on this word, hazachek, because that's the reason so I'm assuming that that's a pretty bad thing, that this kid demonstrated something that was akin to like idolatry or something like that, and that was the reason. So he wasn't like an upstanding member of the community, and that gave her the cause to do this. So I think a lot of it has to be explained by that word. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know what it means either. I'm looking at the Tanakh that I'm reading, and it says mocking, whatever that means. So I'm like saying is that, but that must be pretty bad. Not just that he's like, playing around or goofing around. He did something that's pretty hideous, and that's what starts this whole process.
Okay, so you're saying she must have had a good enough reason. It makes sense, presuming that this, whatever this thing was, it must have been bad enough for her actions to be justified.
Yeah, I mean, something is really bothersome about what he did to her, and that makes some sense to me. Otherwise, I mean, I understand about female competition, but I don't think that's enough. Mm-hmm. I think it has something to do with the boy. Got it.
Yeah, Gary, you want to say more about? I think you're muted, Gary.
I'm muted now. My wife only has two hands. It's tough. The problem I'm saying is, how old is the boy? The guy. I mean, they're not that much older than not just older than her son. So clearly, I don't know. I'm using not to argue with Brandt, but I don't know how significant the wrong words were saying when this was a child. It wasn't an adult. So I'm confused about where the stress would be on doing something wrong when it's a child. Clearly they were playing. Clearly it's competition. And clearly it's another boy. And clearly it's going to be bigger for the time being. But that may be one of the reasons.
Right. So there's kind of two pieces of it that each of you have brought. And I mean, Gary, even prior to Brandt's comment, you were saying there was kind of an ongoing thing that maybe was building up. And because of this moment, that was just the time that it seemed like, okay, this was the last straw. Then this is the time when he's being, more initiated into the community. And Brandt is saying, right, but there also was this specific event. So we can kind of hold either of those pieces as possibilities. And Marlise, yeah?
Oh, well, I'm just in responding to your asking of understanding people's actions. Abraham, who's distressed, does listen to God. I mean, God tells him. So it's interesting. I'm trying to think. I understand him being distressed, and I could say, okay, God told him it's going to be okay, so he does it. But in a way, I also feel a little bit like, is this a little bit like with Isaac and later, because again, it's less violent, but he's still sacrificing in a way his oldest son.
Whenever you send a child to the desert with a little bit of water, that could be a death penalty as well.
Right. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Right. It seemed pretty easy to convince him that it was an okay thing to do. And and a pushback that comes up with the Akedah also is that there are moments when Abraham argues with God, Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. But both this and the Akedah, for whatever reasons, are not times that Abraham chooses to push back when God gives him instructions. Marshall?
Yeah, I just like I'm interested in the repetition of the word Yerah Hadavar or Yerah Be'enecha, that I know it's translated here as be distressed, but Yerah Be'enecha is literally to be evil in your sight. And I think it reinforces the point you made that we look at things from different perspectives. And in effect, Abraham may have been a little bit uncertain of himself as to what he's supposed to do. And so God, in effect, intervenes here in this familial situation and says, okay, let's just go ahead forward and see what's going to be happening.
Right. Abraham, I mean, he's being pulled. He has kind of pulls in multiple directions because he feels connected as the father of Ishmael to look out for him, but also, maybe he didn't even see the thing that happened with Yitzchak, so he's kind of trying to take Sarah's word for it. And as a side note, there's kind of increasing evidence that there can be a thing also of not in the way that after women give birth, people can experience postpartum depression or mood changes, that weaning also has a whole other set of mood disorders that can occur. So I've also, in reading this story now as a nursing parent, I've also wondered, wow, what else might have been going on for her in that moment? But in any case, just to go back to Abraham, he's trying to look out for both of his sons and his wife. And so exactly, it's like he's probably sitting there like, which way do I go? And God kind of gives a directive. And we don't even in the text itself hear that much about Hagar. Like, did anybody even ask her to say, this happened with this interaction happened with your son? Are you going to have a conversation with him about it? Like that step never even really happened. So we're going to move on to some commentaries that provide at least some interpretations of some backstories to, I'm not going to say answer our questions. In most cases, it kind of further complicates the questions, but just again, to kind of get us in this exercise of pondering what might be underlying people's actions. So to add another even dimension to Abraham feeling torn in many directions, who would like to read what Rabbeinu Bachya says about another dimension of what was going on for him at the time? Marshall, go ahead.
Abraham prepared a great feast. There is no doubt that the notables in the land were invited to this feast, since the birth of Yitzchak had been a wondrous event. Also, Abraham was a wealthy man, and it is possible that even kings and advisors of surrounding countries attended this feast.
Great, thank you. So if we're imagining that this feast included characters and, beyond who is directly mentioned in the text, that the scene also includes these noble people and, very fancy kings even who are there, how might that have complicated Abraham's response in this situation?
I just want to say, if you have a crazy son who embarrasses you in your own house, it's another thing to embarrass you in front of the community, the nobles, and all that type of stuff. So that would, if you're having, the entire neighborhood over for dinner, and one of your kids engages in something that's pretty horrendous, that's different than doing it in front of your own parents or something, just your parents. So
exactly.
It makes it worse, actually.
Right. So the thing he did itself might have seemed even worse. And also, if Abraham is sitting there, horrified that this thing happened, but also feeling like he has to maintain his composure in front of all of these dignitaries, then, I think that just like puts him in an even tighter situation between a rock and a hard place. But also, I would think at that point, if God comes to him and says, yeah, that was actually bad, you're totally right, that he might be more primed to listen to instructions like that. If he's coming, if he's still like fuming from you, and you embarrassed me in front of all my noble friends kind of thing. So I don't know, reading that maybe gave me personally a little more empathy into why he wouldn't have wanted to push back more when God said that. But that's just, again, it's all interpretations of a complex event that was happening. Any other thoughts or questions about the Abraham piece? There were also other commentary. I mean, the amount of commentary on this situation could fill volumes. So this is definitely just a selection. But there was another comment that said he was worried that Ishmael would be hurt by being kicked out and worried he would kind of get to do worse things because he was hurt by getting kicked out. So that also kind of adds more empathy to him as a father in that way. And so if you kind of combine those feelings, he was definitely probably in a rough state trying to figure out what to do. So multiple people have already raised the question of this, this one word that Yishmael was found mitzachek when he was with Yitzchak. So what does that word actually mean? Again, we're going to look at two particular pieces, and then I'll kind of try to offer a summary of the other ideas that are out there, of which there are many. So the Midrash Tanchuma piece, would anybody like to read that? Go for it, Marlies.
Okay. Right. The word making sport refers only to practicing idolatry. She said to him, Abraham, cast out this maidservant and her son, lest my son learn from his behavior. Same verb used in reference to the golden calf. Do you want me to read the next?
Sure, great. You can read the Rashi as well.
Okay. Another explanation is that it refers to immoral conduct. Same verb used in reference to Potiphar's wife.
So many commentaries try to look up other forms of the same verb root in other locations. And the particular one about idol worship, there was kind of like festivities after the golden calf where the same verb was used. And so that leads to the conclusion, it could have been related to idol worship. And then the Rashi's suggestion about immoral conduct, I think that's the clearest example where it was like, oh, he must have done something really, really bad. Not just he happened to be an idol worshiper and he was starting to influence Yitzchak. So, and they get that from a description of what happened with the encounter between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And then other ideas that are out there is that it had to do with violence, that he was, shooting arrows or trying to physically harm Yitzchak. Or as Brant, were you the one who mentioned the kind of making fun, or another translation that you read?
I'm looking at this book that I have, and it says, thus Ishmael's behavior proved that he had become thoroughly corrupt and evil, and he had to be sent away, and it cites Rashi.
Yeah, I mean, Rashi...
That absolves Abraham, though. See, that absolves Abraham, which is interesting to me. That he didn't do anything wrong, and the kid is just totally corrupt. That's kind of interesting to me, because clearly, sending away a kid is a pretty big deal. So I wouldn't let Abraham off the hook, but that's what appears to they're doing in this book anyway that I'm looking at. So
right, I think one of the instincts in the classical commentary for sure is to make the patriarchs, make a lot of our biblical heroes look good, for better or for worse, and you're like, oh, well, he sent him away with water and things. He was trying to kind of maybe ameliorate what could have been an even more awful situation by helping him out. So, yeah, I mean, you can definitely look at it in that way. But, the interpretations of this word range from he was poking fun in a kind of teasing way to physical violence and immorality, idol worship. That's kind of the range of what I've seen on the subject, at least. And there's really not clarity on the subject. There's many different midrashim and commentary about it. People kind of quote each other, and it's really a big question mark hanging in the air still. So I also was trying to see, in contrast to the amount of commentary about that, like what was Sarah interpreting, we still really, even in Haggadah stories, don't hear that much about what was going on for Hagar and Ishmael. But the one piece that we do hear is this one line from Genesis Rabbah of Hagar kind of pushing back against God. So would anybody like to read that line from Hagar? Larry, go ahead.
Yesterday you told me, I will greatly increase your offspring, and now he's dying of thirst.
So in the Midrash, the rabbis insert this, painting her in not such a nice way. They're saying, oh, she was being rude towards God, basically. But I mean, my reading of it seemed like, yeah, that was a totally justified way for her to be responding to the situation. Do people have other thoughts about Hagar's role in this?
Well, she's putting up more of a fight than Abraham did, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Her instinct to take care of her son, is coming out very strongly here.
Right. She's arguing. What she's saying is, you told me he's going to be the father of all this offspring, and now he's dying of thirst, and she's basically confronting, which is interesting to me. In some respects, she's braver than the man that fathered this kid.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Do other folks agree or see it differently? Marshall?
I wonder how Abraham could have responded to her. After all, she said, listen, I recognize that Sarah could not conceive. So you brought me into the picture, and I conceived. How ungrateful can you be? What's your response at this point in time? And suddenly you banish us from this household? Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, she, both of them really could feel like they really got thrown under the bus. Like, we saved you, dude. You were never sure you were going to have other offspring, and now this is how we get treated. And the other thing, I mean, we really don't hear about this, but what are any of you imagining Yishmael is thinking throughout this process? If you were to make up a midrash for him, what's in his mind?
Abandoned child syndrome. You know, like adopted kids go through this. You know, it's like you've been abandoned, and you know, what did you do to deserve it? Maybe he doesn't understand what Rashi said in this Tanakh that I have, that maybe he didn't know he was doing something wrong. We don't really know, actually.
Right.
I'm sure he feels a sense of rejection. How could he not?
Sure. And there's nothing in the text itself, or even amongst the commentaries I read, at least, which isn't to say they're not out there, that, you know, there's no discussion with him, no explanation for him. He may have not even known, you know, forget how everybody else is interpreting the mitzachek thing. He may not have even realized what he was doing or how it differed from the values that, you know, let's say it was idol worship. He may not have realized how much it clashed with, you know, the Jewish nation that was being built. So it's interesting that he definitely is kind of, he is, you could, you know, see it almost like he's punished as if he were an adult, or held accountable for his actions to a strong degree. So to zoom back out and look at this story, you know, we've seen how even in the shot, there's many different characters going through their own challenging situations at this point in the text. And there's a lot of things that kind of come to a head at this party for Isaac's weaning. And then I think the commentary only deepens the fact that people had themselves inner conflict about what was going on, or, you know, were overlooked to a degree that gives us a lack of sense of completion or wholeness, perhaps, in the result that happened. And I wanted to bring just one more thing that I have been thinking about to kind of close it out, that one thing I didn't hear in the discussion of mitzachek is that actually it's the same verb root as Yitzchak, that the playing and making fun is actually closely related to the laughter that is embedded in Yitzchak's name. And also, if we think about, you know, Hagar's name as like ger, or a foreigner, that like everybody's looking at this situation, and it seems like the one thing they didn't see is actually how close that, you know, if you're looking linguistically, I'm not saying I know what happened, but just since the rabbis really liked wordplay, the one way they didn't look at it was that in seeing what this, you know, literally like son of the other was going through was so similar to the word that inspired the name of Yitzchak. And that perhaps in trying to untangle all these threads, one of the missing pieces is that we have to be able to see at least a tiny thread of ourselves in the other, like whether or not we understand where they're coming from, to be able to see that a piece of ourselves is actually very close to something like tied into the humanity of this other person whose experience we may not be able to understand. So my personal 2 cents on all of this, the complicated layers of this story, is that it actually is a reminder to try and find even a thread of humanity, of a common story that you can relate to when you encounter a story biblically, personally, in community with people who you may not understand upon first read of the situation. So those are my thoughts on this complex tale and how we might be able to move a piece of it forward for ourselves as well.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.